Lauren, don't go inside. Your husband is not alone in there. I froze with my phone in my hand. Laughter drifted from behind the cafe door. A woman's voice. Young. Too close. Then I heard Daniel say, "Tonight, we start a new life." Without her. My heart stopped. My fingers turned cold. I turned suddenly. And instead of leaving, I stepped forward. I'm glad you're here with me. If you've ever trusted someone completely. If you've ever felt that quiet fear that something isn't right. Stay. Like this video. Subscribe. And tell me where you're watching from. Because what happened next almost destroyed me. And it might help someone else see the truth before it's too late. Back then, I truly believed my life was good. Not the kind of good people post online, perfect lighting, perfect smiles, but the quieter kind that comes from routine, responsibility, and years of building something that doesn't fall apart at the first hard season. My business was doing well. I had reached the point where clients trusted my name before they saw my proposals. I knew my numbers, my risks, my deadlines. I had earned every inch of stability with early mornings, cold coffee, and the stubborn refusal to be careless. The office still smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon disinfectant when I arrived, and I liked that smell. It meant order. It meant control. My children were healthy. That alone should have been enough to make me grateful. Our son had kissed my cheek before school and asked if there would be dessert at dinner. Our daughter had insisted on wearing mismatched socks because she said it made her faster. Ordinary little things, backpacks by the door, cereal bowls in the sink, a forgotten permission slip on the counter, proof that life was moving forward in its usual steady way. And Daniel. Daniel was beside me. Or at least, I believed he was. That morning was our 10th wedding anniversary. I stood in front of the mirror in our hotel in downtown Boston, smoothing the front of my navy dress and fixing the clasp of a thin necklace I rarely wore. The hotel room was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic below and the soft hum of the air conditioner. The carpet was thick enough that my steps made no noise. The bed was perfectly made, as if nobody had slept in it at all, and for a moment I admired how clean everything looked when it wasn't lived in. I remember smiling at my reflection, almost amused by myself. Maybe I'm really happy. It was such a simple thought, and it came with a strange warmth, like an unexpected cup of tea on a cold day. In my purse was the gift I had been planning for months, a watch I had saved for quietly, the way I used to save for school clothes when the children were small. I'd chosen it because Daniel once paused in front of a shop window and admired something similar. He had said, casually, "Beautiful," and then he had walked on, as if wanting anything for himself felt indulgent. I wanted to give him something that said, "I see you. I remember what you like." Mia, my assistant, had booked a table at our favorite cafe near the campus. It wasn't a trendy place. It was small, warm, and predictable. The kind of cafe where the chairs don't match but the coffee is always strong, and the staff remembers your name if you come often enough. Daniel and I used to sit there when we were younger, back when future meant possibility, not fatigue. I texted him earlier than planned. "I'm stuck at work. Go ahead and eat without me. I'll join you soon." He replied quickly. "Okay, love." That message should have comforted me. It did. That's the terrible part. Everything felt normal that day. Calm. Safe. Like a house with locked doors and familiar keys. I finished my lipstick in the mirror and checked my purse again, phone, wallet, the watch box wrapped in tissue paper. I remember the faint scent of the hotel soap on my hands, clean and slightly floral. I remember adjusting my earrings twice, even though they were straight, because nerves often disguise themselves as perfectionism. I had no idea my world was about to collapse. When I think back now, I can see the small signs I ignored. The late nights when Daniel sat angled away from me on the couch, phone tilted so the screen wasn't visible. The way he had become impatient with my questions, as if curiosity were a flaw. The quiet distance in his voice when he said I'm tired, and it didn't mean sleep. But that morning, I did not see those things as warnings. I saw them as life. Marriage after 10 years is not a constant honeymoon. It's schedules. It's responsibilities. It's learning when to speak and when to let silence pass. I had convinced myself that steadiness was the same thing as security. In the elevator down to the lobby, I caught my reflection again in the mirrored wall, composed, professional, a woman who looked like she knew exactly where she was going. I liked that version of myself. I trusted her. Outside, Boston air carried the smell of pavement warming in the sun and something faintly salty from the harbor. People moved with purpose. Students with backpacks. Tourists holding coffee cups. A couple arguing quietly near a crosswalk. Life continued in that indifferent way it always does. I stepped toward the cafe with my purse on my shoulder, the gift inside it pressing lightly against my hip. And in my mind, the evening ahead still looked the way I had imagined it, a table by the window, Daniel's surprised smile, the small pause in his eyes when he realized I had remembered what he wanted. I truly believed I was walking into a celebration. Outside the cafe, I saw his car first. Not our family SUV, the practical one with fingerprints on the windows and children's snacks hidden under the seats. This was the new sports car. Black. Polished. Immaculate. The one I had bought for him last Christmas after he confessed, almost shyly, that he sometimes felt invisible. I had wanted to give him something that said, I still see you. I still choose you. The streetlight above it reflected across the hood like a blade. For a second, just a second, I felt proud. And then the air shifted. I caught the scent before I reached the door handle. Perfume. Not mine. Not the soft citrus I wore for years. Not the familiar trace of laundry detergent from our home. This was something sharper. Sweeter. Intentional. The kind of fragrance that lingers after someone leaves a room on purpose. It hung around the entrance like a warning. My chest tightened slowly, not with panic, but with recognition. Through the cafe window, I could see warm amber light pooling over small wooden tables. The place looked exactly the way it always had, unchanged, dependable, harmless. Students sat hunched over laptops. A couple shared dessert near the counter. And then I saw him. Daniel was sitting at the corner table by the window, the one Mia had reserved. Across from him sat Sophie. She leaned forward slightly, elbows resting near the table edge, her hair falling in deliberate softness over one shoulder. She looked smaller than I remembered. Younger. She was wearing something pale, something that caught the light gently. He was smiling at her. Not the polite smile he wore at business events. Not the distracted one he gave me lately when I spoke about deadlines. This was different. Relaxed. Open. His body angled toward hers in a way I had not felt directed at me in months. I stopped breathing properly. The cafe door was only inches away now. I could hear them more clearly. Laughter. Her voice is light, confident, familiar with him. Then Daniel's voice, lower than usual, almost intimate. You don't have to worry anymore. A pause. I'll handle it. My stomach dropped. Handle what? I stepped closer to the glass, careful not to be seen. And then she said something I couldn't catch, and he answered with the sentence that changed everything. Tonight, we start a new life. Without her. The words were not whispered. They were not hesitant. They were calm. Planned. Without her. Without me. My body reacted before my mind could form a thought. My fingers went numb around my phone. A thin ringing sound filled my ears, as if the world had pulled back slightly. I searched his face for doubt. There was none. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. A simple gesture. But it contained months of decision. That was the first real strike. Not suspicion. Not fear. Certainty. In that second, 10 years of marriage rearranged themselves in my memory. The late nights when he claimed he had strategy calls. The distance in his eyes when I spoke about expanding the business. The subtle irritation when I asked who he was texting. You don't understand me anymore. You're always working. You've changed. I had believed those were complaints. Now I saw them for what they were. Preparation. The evening air felt colder against my skin. A couple walked past me on the sidewalk, laughing softly, unaware that a life was collapsing inches from them. I pressed my palm against the brick wall beside the door to steady myself. The surface was rough and solid. Unlike everything else. Part of me wanted to turn around. To walk away before I had to hear another word. To preserve some version of myself that had not yet been humiliated. But something stronger rose inside me. Not anger. Not drama. Clarity. If I left now, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what else had been said. How far the plan extended. How long I had been absent from my own marriage without realizing it. Inside my purse, the watch I had bought for him felt heavier than it had an hour earlier. A gift for a future he had already replaced. I straightened my shoulders slowly. I adjusted my grip on my phone. Through the glass, he laughed again at something she said. He looked young in that moment. Lighter. As if shedding weight. Perhaps I had been that weight. That realization did not break me. It hardened something quiet and steady within me. I reached for the café door. And this time, I did not hesitate. Whatever waited inside, truth, humiliation, finality, I would meet it standing. Because if he had already begun a life without me, I would no longer remain outside it pretending not to see. I didn't open the café door. Not yet. Instead, I stepped back and leaned against the cold brick wall beside the entrance. The rough surface pressed through the thin fabric of my dress, anchoring me to something solid while everything else inside me began to shift. My hands were shaking. Not in a dramatic way. No one passing by would have noticed. But the tremor was there, small, humiliating, beginning at my fingertips and traveling slowly inward, as if my body were quietly preparing for impact. I closed my eyes. And suddenly, I was no longer standing outside a cafe listening to my husband plan a life without me. I was 10 years younger. I could still hear my son's voice from that very morning. Mom, you're the strongest person I know. He had hugged me tightly before leaving for school, his arms squeezing my waist with that complete, unquestioning trust children have. His backpack had been half-zipped, one shoelace trailing dangerously loose, and I had knelt to fix it while he talked about a math test he wasn't worried about. I kissed his forehead and smiled. Strength. The word lingered now with an almost bitter edge. My heart was beating the same way it had 10 years ago, fast, hopeful, terrified, when I first believed in Daniel. Back then, I was 28 and relentless. I had just signed the lease for my first proper office. It smelled of dust and cleaning chemicals. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the carpet near the door was worn from years of other tenants trying and failing before me. I worked 16-hour days. I ate lunch at my desk. I reviewed contracts at midnight. Success wasn't glamorous, it was stubborn. Daniel entered my life during that season. He was a graduate student then, brilliant, charismatic, slightly chaotic. He wore the same coat for 3 winters, insisting he preferred simplicity. He pretended not to notice when his bank card declined at restaurants. He laughed off hardship like it was temporary, like the universe simply needed to catch up to his ambition. I admired him. I admired his mind. His confidence. His belief that life would eventually reward him. I mistook potential for character. When his scholarship was cut unexpectedly during his final year, he didn't ask me for help. He just grew quieter. Distracted. The spark in his eyes dimmed slightly. I offered to pay his tuition. "It's a loan," I said gently. We both knew it wasn't. I paid it without keeping records. When his parents' house nearly went into foreclosure, I helped restructure their debt. I made phone calls. I negotiated terms. I transferred money quietly so that Daniel wouldn't feel small. When he wanted to launch his first startup, an ambitious but fragile idea, I invested in it. I stayed up late reviewing his presentations after finishing my own work. I believed in him when investors hesitated. I believed love meant standing behind someone while they built themselves. Mia warned me once. We were sitting in my office late at night, takeout containers open on my desk, city lights reflecting in the dark window behind us. "Lauren," she said softly, "you're giving a lot. Just make sure someone is giving back." I smiled at her. "He is," I insisted. "Just in different ways." I believed love was measured in loyalty, not in balance. Over time, Daniel's world became more comfortable. He graduated. He dressed better. He carried himself differently. Confidence replaced uncertainty. But gratitude faded. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. It dissolved quietly, like sugar in hot coffee, present at first, then invisible. I remember the first time he mentioned Sophie. "She's sharp," he said casually after a corporate charity event. "You'd like her." And I did. She was polite. Modest. Attentive. She asked thoughtful questions about my company's strategy and listened carefully when Daniel spoke, nodding with admiration that felt sincere. After that evening, her name appeared more often. She understands industry trends. She really listens to my ideas. "You don't always see what I'm trying to build." That sentence stayed with me. "You don't understand me anymore." I told myself it was stress. Marriage changes. Work grows heavier. Children demand energy. Romance shifts into responsibility. I worked harder. I expanded the business. I planned vacations. I bought the sports car. I told myself that success would speak the language he needed to hear. Outside the cafe, leaning against that wall, I felt something settle into place with painful clarity. I had built a life. But somewhere along the way, he had started building an exit. And the most painful realization was not that he had chosen someone younger. It was that I had confused being indispensable with being loved. I had believed that providing stability guaranteed loyalty. I had believed that sacrifice created permanence. Inside the cafe, their laughter rose again. It sounded easy. Effortless. And in that moment, I understood something that hurt more than betrayal itself. While I was building a future for us, he was preparing one without me. I opened the cafe door. The small bell above it rang softly, politely, an almost cheerful sound that felt absurdly out of place. Warm air wrapped around me immediately, carrying the scent of roasted coffee beans, caramel syrup, and baked bread. It was the same scent I had associated with comfort for years. Daniel saw me. I know he did, because something in his face changed before he even stood up. The ease disappeared first. Then the color drained from his cheeks. Sophie followed his gaze and turned her head. For a split second, the three of us simply looked at one another. Then Daniel rose too quickly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Lauren." My name left his mouth as if it had become unfamiliar. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush toward them. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, controlled, refusing to let my body betray the tremor inside my chest. I placed my purse gently on the table and looked from him to her. Up close, Sophie looked even younger than I remembered. Her skin was smooth, unlined by years of compromise. Her hair fell softly around her shoulders in that carefully effortless way. She withdrew her hand from his as if it had burned her. "I didn't know you were coming," Daniel said quickly. I met his eyes. "You didn't expect me to." The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was heavy. Dense. It pressed against my ears. I studied Sophie carefully. I remembered the first time I truly noticed her, not as a junior consultant, not as an employee, but as a presence. It had been at a charity gala 2 years ago. She wore something pale and modest, her makeup subtle, her smile gentle. She asked thoughtful questions about my company's expansion plans. She complimented my leadership in a way that felt respectful, almost admiring. Daniel had stood beside her longer than necessary that night. On the drive home, he said casually, "She's special." I thought he meant talented. After that, her name began to surface more often. "Sophie understands industry trends better than most. Sophie really listens to my ideas. You don't always see what I'm trying to build." At first, I dismissed it. I was busy. Focused. Managing growth, employees, risk. Then the tone shifted. "You're always working. You've changed. You don't understand me anymore." The words didn't sound accusatory at the time. They sounded tired. I told myself marriage evolves. That intensity fades. That routine replaces passion. One evening, our son wandered into the kitchen while Daniel sat on the couch, phone angled carefully away. "Dad is always texting someone," he said absent-mindedly. "Even at night." Daniel laughed. "Work stuff." I chose to believe him. Not because I was naive, but because I trusted the history we had built. Back in the cafe, Sophie finally spoke. "This isn't what you think." Her voice was soft, composed, almost fragile, but there was calculation beneath it. "When did it start?" I asked calmly. Daniel answered too quickly. "It's not serious." Not serious. 8 months of late meetings. Unexplained expenses. Business trips that required hotel stays when they hadn't before. New passwords on shared accounts. The subtle way he turned his phone face down when I entered a room. The unfamiliar perfume I once smelled faintly on his jacket, a scent I convinced myself belonged to a client. Not serious. I felt something settle inside me, not fury, not heartbreak. Recognition. The red flags I had ignored lined themselves up with painful precision. The sports car I bought him because he said he felt invisible. The sudden gym memberships. The renewed attention to his appearance. The distant look in his eyes when I spoke about future plans. Sophie's eyes filled with tears now. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. But she did not look ashamed. She looked interrupted. As if the plan had simply unfolded too soon. Daniel reached toward me instinctively, as though muscle memory still belonged to us. "Lauren, we were going to tell you." "Tell me." As if betrayal becomes honorable when scheduled in advance. I glanced around the cafe. People pretended not to watch. A waitress lingered near the counter, wiping the same spot repeatedly. Outside, traffic lights shifted from red to green without caring who stood inside braking. I realized then that this was not an accident. It was progression. Carefully built. Patiently maintained. The most dangerous red flag had not been Sophie. It had been my own willingness to rationalize. I believed loyalty was permanent because I had never wavered. I believed sacrifice created security. But loyalty is not inherited. It is chosen. And Daniel had already chosen. The only thing left unresolved in that moment was what I would choose in return. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask questions twice. Instead, I reached into my purse and slowly removed the printed documents Mia had sent me only minutes earlier. My hands were steady now. Almost unnaturally so. I placed the first sheet on the table. Then the second. Then the third. The sound of paper sliding against wood felt louder than it should have. Bank statements. Transfer confirmations. Hotel invoices. Luxury purchases categorized neatly under business development. $40,000. 8 months. One recipient. Sophie's name appeared again and again in clean, unemotional type. Daniel stared at the pages as if they had materialized out of thin air. Lauren, he started, his voice low. I lifted my hand slightly. Don't. He stopped. Sophie swallowed hard. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening slightly, but her eyes did not show confusion. They showed exposure. I turned my phone toward them and opened the message thread with Mia. I had written only 4 words. Check Daniel's accounts. Everything. Her reply had been immediate. Call me. Outside the cafe door, I had listened as she read the transactions aloud in a calm, professional tone. Luxury suite in Manhattan. 3 separate weekends. Private dining reservations in Miami. Designer boutique purchases. Airfare for 2. Each charge marked as legitimate business expense. Business. Development. The euphemism almost impressed me. I looked at Daniel again. This is what you meant by starting over? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. It's not what you think. I tilted my head slightly. Then explain what I should think. He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any confession could. Sophie tried to speak. We didn't plan for this to hurt you. Hurt me. The understatement might have been laughable if it weren't so revealing. I leaned back in my chair and studied them both carefully. Daniel's body angled subtly toward her. Protective. Aligned. They were already positioned as a unit. That was when the realization settled fully. I was not confronting temptation. I was confronting replacement. My phone vibrated again. Mia. Should I come? She had asked. Yes. 10 minutes later, she entered the cafe, composed, efficient, and entirely unafraid. Loyalty doesn't hesitate. It simply arrives. She stood beside me and placed her tablet on the table. With a few taps, a visual timeline appeared on the screen. Red markers for each transfer. Dates aligned in sequence. Patterns undeniable. The cafe had grown quieter. Conversations softened into whispers. A waitress lingered near the counter longer than necessary. Daniel finally exhaled sharply. You're overreacting. There it was. The familiar dismissal. Overreacting. As if betrayal were subjective. As if I had misread numbers. For 8 months, I said evenly, you transferred our money to fund a secret relationship. It wasn't serious, he insisted. 8 months. Hotel stays. Private dinners. Future plans whispered over coffee. Not serious. Sophie's tears began to fall now, but they seemed less like remorse and more like inconvenience. A plan interrupted too soon. I love him, she said suddenly. The words landed in the center of the table. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. There was no denial this time. No deflection. I felt something detach inside me, not my heart, but my illusion. Love. Perhaps they believed that word purified everything. But love does not hide behind expense reports. It does not require deception to survive. I gathered the documents slowly, stacking them with care. I will contact my attorney tomorrow, I said. Daniel's head snapped up. Lauren, don't be dramatic. Dramatic. Another attempt to reduce reality into emotion. I am not being dramatic, I replied quietly. I am being informed. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. Not guilt. Not regret. Uncertainty. Because he realized I was not going to cry. Not going to beg. Not going to compete. He had prepared for anger. He had prepared for tears. He had not prepared for calm. Outside, night had settled completely. Streetlights cast long reflections across the cafe windows. People continued walking, unaware that a decade had just fractured at a corner table. I stood up. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. Mia stepped aside without needing instruction. Do not come home tonight, I said. Sophie inhaled sharply. Daniel reached toward me instinctively, muscle memory overriding logic. Lauren, wait. I stepped back. No. There are moments when a marriage ends without shouting. Without spectacle. It ends in clarity. As I walked toward the door, I did not feel broken. I felt awake. And that frightened him more than any tears ever could. I opened the cafe door again, this time with no hesitation at all, and walked back to their table as if I had simply forgotten something important, because I had. My dignity. Not the fragile kind built on appearances, but the kind built on truth. Daniel was still seated, shoulders tense, his eyes following me like he was watching a door close in slow motion. Sophie sat rigidly, her napkin clenched in her fist, mascara already threatening to betray her. Mia remained standing beside me, calm and precise, the way she always was when a meeting turned serious. Lauren, Daniel said, lowering his voice, trying to make this private. Please. Not here. Not here. As if betrayal had a preferred location. As if the place mattered more than the act. I looked around the cafe. People were listening without pretending very hard. A couple near the window had paused mid-bite. The barista's hands stayed still on the espresso machine. Even the background music felt too soft, like it was waiting for permission to continue. This is exactly here, I said quietly. Because you chose here. Daniel's face tightened. You're trying to humiliate me. I almost smiled. No, I corrected. You humiliated me. I'm just refusing to carry it alone. I slid the papers across the table again, slowly, neatly, so no one could claim I was emotional or irrational. Bank statements. Hotel receipts. Transfers. A timeline of choices. Sophie stared at the pages as if they were written in a language she couldn't read, but her hands trembled in a way that told me she understood perfectly. Daniel reached for the stack as if he could hide it. Mia placed her hand over his, not forcefully, just firmly enough to stop him. Don't, she said. One word. Flat. Final. Daniel pulled his hand back, offended by the fact that another woman had boundaries in his presence. I looked at Sophie. You were at the charity event 2 years ago, I said, my voice even. You shook my hand. You thanked me for supporting young professionals. You looked me in the eye. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned to Daniel. And you sat in my home and ate dinners I cooked. You kissed our children goodnight. You accepted gifts I planned for months. Then you sat here and said you wanted a new life without me. A sharp breath moved through the room, someone else's, not mine. Daniel's voice rose slightly, no longer controlled. You don't understand what our marriage has become. What has it become? I asked. His silence was an answer he didn't want to give in public. Mia tapped her screen, and the tablet displayed the transaction list in bright clarity, dates, amounts, vendors, locations. She tilted it slightly so Daniel couldn't block it from my view. Then, without asking permission, she turned the tablet outward, just enough that the nearest tables could see the bold total at the top. $40,218. 67. A few heads turned. A chair shifted. The cafe became a courtroom in miniature, ordinary people suddenly serving as witnesses. Daniel noticed, and panic flashed across his face. "Mia, what the hell are you doing?" "Helping Lauren," she replied simply. Sophie's tears finally spilled. "I didn't ask him for money," she said quickly, as if that would cleanse her. "He offered. He said you didn't appreciate him. He said you were cold." Cold. I thought of myself waking early to pack lunches. Of late-night calls with suppliers. Of spreadsheets at the kitchen table while Daniel scrolled his phone and told me I was obsessed. I nodded once. "So you believed him," I said. "Convenient." Daniel stood up abruptly, chair scraping loudly. "Lauren, stop. This is insane. Insane. The classic word men use when women refuse to stay quiet." I stood too, not fast, not dramatic, just solid. "No," I said. "Insane is letting you rewrite my life while I smile politely. Insane is paying for your escape and calling it marriage." His eyes darted around the cafe, searching for sympathy, for an ally, for anything that would return him to control. But control dissolves when truth is spoken plainly. Sophie's sobs grew louder. People stared openly now. Not cruelly, just with that stunned discomfort people have when they realize something they assumed was safe and ordinary is not. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Because there was nothing left to deny. The numbers were there. The pattern was there. The new life he promised her was there, built on my labor, my trust, my silence. I gathered the papers, tucked them back into my purse, and picked up the gift box with the watch. I held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I set it down on the table in front of Daniel. "Happy anniversary," I said softly. And I walked away while the cafe stayed silent behind me, as if the whole room had finally exhaled. I walked out of the cafe with my back straight, because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fold. The bell above the door rang again, bright, ordinary, and for a moment it felt like the sound belonged to someone else's life. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered. The street smelled of damp pavement and exhaust, and a thin wind moved between the buildings as if searching for a place to settle. I took 3 steps before my knees threatened to soften. Not collapse, just the quiet warning of a body that has been holding itself together too tightly. Mia followed me out. She didn't touch me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She simply walked beside me, matching my pace, her presence steady and respectful. That, more than anything, kept me upright. Behind the glass, I could still see Daniel standing over the table, his shoulders rigid, his face turned downward as if the numbers on those pages might rearrange themselves into mercy. Sophie sat with her head bowed, hands covering her mouth, crying the way people cry when a dream has been punctured. No one spoke. Not them. Not the people watching. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels final. We reached the corner, and only then did I breathe properly. A deep inhale that scraped slightly in my throat. The first full breath I'd taken since I heard his voice say, "Without her." Mia glanced at me. "Do you want me to call the driver?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. My voice sounded calm, and that frightened me. Calm was not what I expected to feel. I expected rage, tears, shaking hands. Instead, I felt clean. As if something toxic had finally been removed. We walked toward the hotel. The city kept moving around us, people laughing, couples arguing softly, phones ringing, cars honking at a late pedestrian. Life did not pause to honor heartbreak. It never does. That used to offend me. That night, it comforted me. It reminded me I was allowed to keep going. In the elevator, my reflection stared back at me in the mirrored wall. My lipstick was still intact. My hair still pinned neatly. A woman who looked composed enough to be heading to dinner, not away from a marriage. The doors opened on our floor, and I stepped into the hallway with its muted carpet and quiet lighting. The hotel smelled faintly of laundry and polished wood. Familiar, sanitized, indifferent. Inside our room, everything was exactly as I had left it earlier, bed made, curtain half open, the city lights blinking beyond the window. The gift bag from the boutique sat on the dresser, empty now, because I had left the watch on the table like a gravestone marker. I set my purse down and stood very still. That was when my hands began to shake again. Not from fear. From release. I sank onto the edge of the bed and looked at my fingers as if they belonged to someone else. They were cold. Pale. Trembling. I pressed my palms together until they warmed. A sound escaped me, half laugh, half breath. 10 years. 10 years of believing that being reliable made me unreplaceable. I heard Daniel's voice in my memory, not from tonight, but from our early years. "You're my home," he used to say. And I realized, with a dull ache, that some people call you home only until they find a door they prefer. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel, "Please. We need to talk." I stared at the screen until the words lost meaning. Then I turned the phone face down. Mia stood near the door, waiting without hovering. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. "No," I said gently. "But thank you." She nodded, and before she left, she added quietly, "You did nothing wrong by trusting your husband." The words almost cracked me open. After she was gone, I went into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and watched water run over my hands. I scrubbed them as if I could wash off the entire evening. The water was warm. My skin turned pink. It didn't help, but the ritual steadied me. Back in the room, I sat again, this time at the small desk by the window. I opened my laptop. Not for work, never for work at a moment like this, but for proof. I pulled up the files Mia had sent. I saved them into a folder. I backed them up twice. I emailed them to my personal account and then to a private attorney contact I'd kept for years but never needed. My breathing slowed as I worked. This was my language. Facts. Records. Timelines. Pain becomes manageable when it is organized. Only after everything was saved did I let myself do the thing I'd been avoiding. I called home. My daughter answered first, breathless with excitement. "Mom. Are you coming for cake?" My throat tightened. I swallowed carefully. "Not tonight, sweetheart," I said. "I'm still working." There was a small disappointed pause. Then she said, "Okay. Love you." "I love you too." After I hung up, I stared at the dark screen for a long time. Then I called my son's number just to hear his voicemail greeting, his cheerful, careless voice, and I didn't leave a message. I simply listened and ended the call. When the room finally went quiet again, I lay down fully clothed on top of the bedspread. The fabric was cool beneath my arms. Outside, Boston lights blinked like distant signals. I expected sobbing. Instead, tears came slowly, silently, with no sound at all. They ran into my hairline and pooled near my ears. My chest rose and fell in controlled breaths, like someone practicing not to drown. And in the middle of that quiet crying, something inside me loosened. Not love. Not hope. The need to protect him from consequences. For the first time in years, I stopped carrying his comfort alongside my own pain. I wiped my face, sat up, and whispered into the empty room, more to myself than to anyone else. I can breathe again. And that was the beginning of everything that came after. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, as if my body had accepted that sleep was no longer something I could afford carelessly. The hotel room was quiet, but my mind was not. I sat at the desk by the window with a cup of bitter coffee and opened my laptop again. I didn't scroll. I didn't distract myself. I did what I had always done when life threatened to unravel. I built a plan. By 9 o'clock, I had called my attorney. By noon, the first paperwork was in motion. Divorce is not one dramatic decision. It is a series of small, merciless steps that teach you what a marriage actually contained, who signed what, who benefited, who hid, who lied. I asked for full financial disclosure. I requested temporary custody arrangements. I froze joint accounts where I could. I moved my personal savings into a separate institution. I changed passwords. I changed locks. At 3 in the afternoon, Daniel finally called. I watched his name glow on the screen like a stain. I let it ring. When he texted, "Please. For the kids," I replied with one sentence. All communication goes through my lawyer. It was not revenge. It was oxygen. That evening, I went home, briefly, only to pack what mattered. I did it while the children were at school, so they wouldn't see their mother collecting pieces of a life like evidence. I moved through the house quietly, noticing how ordinary everything looked. A cereal box left open. A crayon on the floor. The faint smell of detergent in the hallway. The home had not changed. I had. I packed the children's favorite books first. Then clothes. Then their school folders. Then the small things that held comfort, my daughter's worn stuffed rabbit, my son's baseball cap, the framed photo from our last beach trip before Daniel became distant. I didn't take the wedding album. I didn't take the gifts. I took the truth, documents, records, contracts, everything that proved what I had built and what I would protect. 2 weeks later, we were in Miami. People assume moves like that are impulsive, but it was calculated. I had an office there already. I had clients. I had a network. I had sunlight that felt less heavy than Boston's gray edges. Most importantly, I had distance. The first morning in our new place, the children woke early and ran barefoot across the tile, laughing, as if the change were an adventure. I stood in the kitchen making pancakes from a mix I'd bought at the corner store, listening to their voices echo in unfamiliar rooms. It was the first time in months I felt warmth in the house that didn't come from effort. My business became my anchor again, not as a distraction, but as proof. I poured my energy into building my own brand the way I should have years earlier, under my name alone, without compromise, without apologizing for ambition. I hired carefully. I tightened finances. I expanded contracts. I made sure every account and asset was protected by structure, not sentiment. At night, when the children slept, I sat on the balcony and listened to the city breathe. Traffic in the distance. A faint rhythm of music from somewhere below. The humid air smelled like salt and night flowers. Sometimes grief still arrived, quietly, unexpectedly, but it no longer owned me. Daniel tried to come back in small ways. A message about missing us. A request to talk like adults. An apology that never touched the core truth, only circled it. I didn't respond. Because my reward was not winning. My reward was peace. Months later, when the divorce was finalized, I felt no triumph. I felt steadiness. Like someone who has survived a storm and now trusts the strength of her own foundation more than the promise of calm weather. The children adjusted. They made friends. They stopped asking why Dad didn't live with us, and started telling me about their days again without that careful tension in their voices. And I understood something I wish I'd known sooner. A life without lies is quieter. But it is also lighter. If someone truly loves you, they will not build a secret future behind your back. Love does not require hiding bank statements, silencing phones, or rewriting history to make betrayal sound reasonable. It stands in daylight. It survives questions. If someone uses you, they will call it misunderstanding. They will say you are dramatic. They will say you changed. But the truth is simple: people who respect you do not gamble with your dignity. All names and identifying details in this story have been changed to protect privacy. Now I want to ask you honestly. Would you forgive this kind of betrayal? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And if this story gave you strength, stay with me for the next one.